Go.
Okay, welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 487th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give our speaker an hour to make a presentation, or up to an hour. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter we listen only one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience, not speeches of the speaker. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. And our speaker gets the last word. He gets comment to close the meeting. That's how it works. So, but before we introduce our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody have an announcement they want to make? Now is the time to do it. Any announcements?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, come on up here.
All right. Dallas Philosophers Forum starts meeting on the 14th, which is this coming Tuesday, I believe. And we're going to be talking about gun control. So all of you liberals will be glad to go because the speaker is probably going to agree with you. So, but it should be a lively discussion and Q&A time, I'm sure. So it's $5 unless you're a student. So welcome y'all to come. Food's good, atmosphere is great, and it's actually a quiet place where you can actually hear people talk, which is great.
Who is the speaker?
Blinn Combs, I think, is the speaker. He came to us with a subject about gun. It was proliferation of guns or something like that. But anyway, we had him adjust his topic to make it more philosophical, since we are a philosophers forum. But anyway, we welcome y'all to come out.
Time and date?
14th, Tuesday. Lecture starts at 7:30. You can get there as early as 6 for dinner if you want. And that's the more interesting time because you have like an hour to sit down and talk with other people and discuss the world's events, whatever.
The place? Where's that?
Boca's Restaurant in Richardson off of southwest corner of Central and Beltline.
Very good. Any other announcements? Any other announcements we have? You got any announcements? Or that's it? I guess we're all done with announcements. Next week, we got David O'Neill. He's sitting back there. He'll be our speaker. He's going to talk on the science of the priest. I'm not going to read all this. It's on your itinerary. It ought to be very interesting. And but he'll be here next week, and he's here this week to see who his audience is going to be. So anyway, there he is waving. So anyway, that's our speaker next week. January 25th. What is a 14th Amendment U.S. citizen? That's Eve Ellsbury. She'll be talking about that. It's on your itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. On February 1st, we have Richard D. Easton, the University of Chicago. He's going to talk about on the history, threats, and future outlook of GPS. It's on the itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. And on February 8th, I don't have it here, but hold on 1 second. That's Jan. Yeah. Jan lady. Yeah, right here. On February 8th, it's not on your itinerary. It's just one little sheet here. On the power of belief, Jan Lee. She's a PhD in anthropology and a Mandarin teacher. She'll be here to talk about that. So that's on your itinerary also. So before we've already had announcements, so, and there are no other announcements anyway. Our speaker tonight is Ray Crelia. He's going to talk about on threats that seriously challenge our nation's foundations. He has spoken to us on several occasions. He will discuss how our country is threatened by the rise of radical ideologies that challenge the way we're founded, oppose founding fathers, demean our Constitution, and would even seek to overthrow our way of life. He will contrast these threats with the basic American principles that have made our country the envy of the world. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Ray Crelia.
Just throw money. Thank y'all so much for being here. I'm going to have to go off. This is much better, just the light. I do have some free without cost handouts that are back there on that table. There's 4 of them, and they're very worthwhile to read. Whether you agree with them or not, they are very substantive by some authoritative writers, and those will add a whole lot to your information, your education. Okay. I do appreciate your coming to listen to me. I'm always flattered that somebody comes and listens. But I do want to talk to you today about what I see as a rising internal threat to our country. That not only destructive ideas and policies are being promoted but sadly we are seeing these ideas embraced by a large segment of our population. It's one thing that ideas are out there that are harmful, but it's another thing that people like them. It seems as though our young people, and sometimes called millennials, are actually favorable to government action that would lower their lifestyle and curtail their freedom. Well, how did all this happen? How did our youth get taught? Why didn't our youth get taught American values and constitutionalism? Well, it didn't happen. It didn't happen to you and I probably either. Now, certainly public education is a large part of the problem. Schools must be politically correct these days, so students are indoctrinated with leftist, socialist teachings that simply are not in harmony with American life, traditions, and culture. Who takes courses in public school on the Constitution? Of all the things that our youngsters ought to be learning, it would be the Constitution, and maybe even court cases and things like that. They don't learn them. Are our young people being taught positive aspects of American history or just the negative? Of course there's negative, but which one are they taught? But it's not our point tonight to figure out why so many people, and not just millennials, are embracing radical ideas that would really be destructive to our United States of America. Now, we're a strong country. We're the envy of the world. Do not doubt that. But we have always followed some ultimately simple principles that not only guided our founding as a country, but continue to guide us today, at least to some extent. All right, I'm going to give you 5 of them. We'll talk about them. I got these from the Heritage Foundation. I think they were very succinct, clear, simple ideas, and if we could follow those and continue to follow those, we will be a better country. All right, here they are. Individual freedom, limited government, free enterprise, traditional values, and a strong national defense. We're going to be talking about those. First of all, individual freedom. Perhaps individual freedom would be easily understood by most Americans because we have scarcely experienced anything else. We come and go as we wish, we work where we want, we marry the person we want, we travel places that we want to visit. But what's more important than all these is our freedom to worship as we please. And before you go too far with that, a freedom of worship has been intrinsic in any kind of life and culture and country that you can name. It's always been that way. Our country was formed because King George wouldn't let the people worship the way they wanted to, and so they came here. And you'll have a fight in other countries if you try to change their way of worship. But freedom of worship and freedom of speech is absent in a whole lot of totalitarian countries. Now, just one example real quickly. China is cracking down on anything and everything that is Christian. Christian churches are being outlawed. Christian speech anywhere could get you put into one of China's re-education camps. Have you heard about those? Now, there's no telling what would happen in a re-education camp. Now, there are churches in China, and these are the people, the congregation. They're not going to have a building with a cross on the top of it, but they are underground. But you can guarantee everybody who's worshiping or trying to worship there is in fear of being apprehended by the Chinese authorities. There is no toleration. There's no freedom of worship in China. And you may have heard on the news about how China's bearing down on the Uyghurs. A lot of people say, what in the world? And it goes over everybody's head. But they are in Western China, and horrible things have happened to those people. And they are Muslim. China doesn't even allow the Muslims. And they are going to re-education camps. China is also implementing a sophisticated facial recognition system throughout the country. Facial recognition. Big Brother is watching. And over there, you can be assured that's what's happening. Now, this is not individual freedom. This is tyranny. And that's what China is. Could it happen here? Well, you lose your individual freedom when government has unchecked power. We never want to underestimate what government will do if they can get away with it. Here is something for us to remember every day. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. We are not vigilant. I gave the example of China, but India isn't any better. But each one of those, China, India, have over 1 billion people each. Could individual freedom come under threat here? Do we still have freedom of worship and freedom of speech? Well, where would threats of freedom of worship and speech come from?
Government.
Hold on. We have recently seen a big threat play out. In suburban Denver, Colorado, Mr. Jack Phillips owned the Masterpiece Cake Shop. How many of you have heard of the Masterpiece Cake Shop? 1 or 2. All right. I have met him. He is a Christian. He's a good man. And he still has a thriving business. Good bakery goods too. Well, he was taken to court because he would not use his God-given talents and creativity to design a cake for a homosexual wedding. He was, of course, targeted for this court case. There were dozens of bakeries all over Denver and all over Colorado that would have loved to bake that cake. But he was targeted because the political LGBT movement knew that he would not do it, and they wanted to send a message. What message? The message is, you love us, you accept us as normal, and you bake a cake when we tell you to. Your Christian morals, your constitutional freedom of religion don't count. Mr. Phillips was put through years of litigation, upheaval, turmoil, which was the idea. But in the end, he won a Supreme Court case. Can you believe Masterpiece Bake Shop? No, it wasn't as big as this place. goes to the Supreme Court. It was decided that he had firmly held religious convictions that prevented him from using his creative talents for what he saw as an immoral purpose. The lawsuit against him violated the Free Exercise Clause, First Amendment. So, what does that prove? Does it not prove that LGBT political is a threat to our First Amendment, constitutional freedom of religion, and of course, a court case of that magnitude should prove it? Would any of you be saying, I don't care about religion, get off of this religion? My friends, do you not understand that if the First Amendment is destroyed, the rest of them will follow? Have you heard of the domino effect? Remove that First Amendment as the domino, and the rest of them will go. The political left will not stop. What will happen to other freedoms? What will happen to our country? Freedom-loving Americans must push back. How many freedoms are you willing to give up? What freedom will we lose that you do care about? Mr. Phillips pushed back, and we're all the better for it. Second, individual freedom. Next is limited government. Our government's first responsibility is to protect our country from our enemies. Our Constitution makes it very plain. This is the primary function of government. But presently, there are 15 departments in the President's cabinet. Labor, Interior, Energy, Treasury, Education, Justice, Transportation, Agriculture, Commerce. There's more. Why should the federal government in Washington, D.C. concern itself with education in Dallas? Why should Washington, D.C. meddle with agriculture in Texas? How about energy? Is it because we're too stupid to figure it out by ourselves? Well, I can assure you folks that that's exactly how these Ivy League Northeast liberals think about Texas. We're a bunch of hicks to them. So many in the federal government believe that the whole of the American population just can't manage without them. We must have their superior knowledge and their expertise. Truth be known, that is another way of control. Raw control over each and every industry in this country is not limited government. The Constitution sets out clearly what the federal government is to do, but leaves the rest to the states. This is states' rights. The best control, remember this, the best control is at the lowest possible level. Silly example, if the neighborhood you live in got a problem, well, fix it. Get together, work it out the best you can. Well, you say, I'm not sure. Well, okay, get the city involved. Can't get the city involved or need more? County is okay. State? But for heaven's sake, what is the need of trying to do the federal government? We certainly don't need them. But it's the same with education, energy, agriculture. People have always been able to work out their own problems without getting Washington bureaucrats involved. They are too far away. They're disinterested in local issues. They don't understand the differences in states. There is a difference in states. We are different from New York and Connecticut.
Amen.
Did you know that? And so one size does not fit all. The people that are most knowledgeable are the people that are the closest to the problem. The formula: more government equals less freedom. You want more government? You're going to lose some freedom. It's always the way it is. Our country was founded with the concept of freedom. When government is unlimited, it regulates, legislates, taxes, controls, and oppresses. Then there's less freedom. Number 3, be a short one. Free enterprise. Individual freedom, limited government, free enterprise. Since it comes on the heels of limited government, we already have a pretty good idea of what that is meant. We don't want the feds restricting our entrepreneurs from pursuing new ventures. They can explore new ideas, come up with new products, new services. We must understand that government regulations, laws, and restrictions can be discouraging for those who want to branch out into new fields. We want to encourage people to be entrepreneurs, to develop something new. We don't want some silly law, especially based in Washington, to tell them, you can't do that. We've had a certain amount of freedom, and that's why we have the strong country that we have, because people have been able to innovate and to invent and be creative. It just made all of American life better. All right, number 4. You got a good hold on your seat? We come to traditional values. Now that we could get controversial here. Traditional values, though, are being rejected among the highly educated elites, especially those in our country's universities. Some of the most radical ideas probably are going to come out of some universities. As I said at the beginning, where do our young people get these radical, socialist, anti-God ideas? Well, they're taught those ideas. They learned it in school and college. A second way that people are being taught today, not just students, but it's through the media. The media are teaching our people. When people hear daily that conservatives are surely a hate group, they are white nationalists, they're fascists, Islamophobic, homophobic, etc., and etc., they come to believe it. And they're hearing it every day, read it every day. Schools and the media are the teachers now in our country. It has been a sad fact that the left has been better at framing their arguments for socialism, communism, than conservatives are at promoting freedom. Sadly, it's been like that for a long time. Well, let's talk about a traditional value or two. One of them is simply patriotism. When we honor our flag, our anthem, our country, we realize how blessed we are to live in this great land. We feel safe, we have freedom, we have a high standard of living, and there is peace. So many other countries around the world can't say that. Hong Kong is in terrible upheaval. They're afraid of being taken over by communist China. The UK has got the Brexit going on. I don't know how it affects the people on the street, but boy, there's been havoc in the government. France has been having protests galore. They've shut down the transportation system, so it's a mess over there. Back in the 20s, George M. Cohan had a song called "You're a Grand Old Flag, You're a High-Flying Flag, and forever in peace may you wave, an emblem of the land I love, home of the free and the brave." Then we have the sad spectacle of football players who are taking the knee. If you're aware of what's going on there, it is a disrespect for our flag, a disrespect for our anthem. Who teaches them to do that? They are taught that. Football players that are making millions of dollars they could not make anywhere else in any other country, and they can't honor the land and its emblems that gave them that opportunity. So misguided, such a lack of understanding. Another traditional value. It should not need to be said. Only in our climate now does this next one need to be said. Another traditional value is that marriage is between a man and a woman. The family is the essential foundation of a civil society, and traditional marriage is the cornerstone of the family. Wise men from long ago recognized when you destroy the family, you destroy the country. Marriage is between a man and a woman. That is a traditional American value. It's a traditional value anywhere. That's two of them. All right. The last one. We've had individual freedom, limited government, free enterprise, traditional value. A few comments about a strong national defense. We have always had enemies. There are some countries with a power-hungry despot as a leader who would like nothing more than to bring down the USA. They're still around. And if we aren't safe, if we aren't protected, folks, nothing else matters. How can I say that? Do you remember 9/11? We all do. And on 9/11, the country nearly shut down. People weren't concerned about a strong economy. They weren't concerned about diversity. They weren't concerned about climate change. They were worried about their very lives and what was going to happen next. With an attack on the World Trade Center, what is the next shoe to fall? And we didn't know. Also, a significant part of Homeland Security is protecting the borders. All countries have borders. If they don't have borders, they're not a country. And we're not trying to protect some imaginary line that's been drawn. We're trying to protect our people. We don't want our cities overrun with foreigners who don't even speak our language, don't respect our customs, don't respect our laws. Who is that in the neighborhood running around? Who is that outside on the street? Who is that outside our door? Will we feel safe? Are you ready to open the borders to satisfy some leftist cause? There are those who are in our government and who have been running for office who will open the border. They will do it. Hillary Clinton wanted to open the borders. With her as president, where would we be now? And folks, we cannot hire enough police at that point to protect us. But opening the borders is not strong defense, it is dropping our defense, and we will be eternally sorry, and it will be too late if we let this happen. How's my time? Good. All right, we've talked about 5 basic American principles taken from Heritage Foundation: the individual freedom, the limited government, free enterprise, traditional values, strong defense. All right, let's list some of the more radical, left-wing, horrible ideas out there that would almost for sure ensure the destruction of our country. I hope you don't think I'm going overboard with it. If we allow some of these things, then it will be too late. We've never done it. We've been fine before. If we allow some of these things as an experiment, what a foolish, foolhardy thing to do. Here's one. The Green New Deal. They got that from Roosevelt, in the 30s. That was the New Deal. So this is the Green New Deal. Everything is going to be green. All right? If this were implemented, the cost would bankrupt the country. Now that is an exaggeration. Others have said so too. The American way of life, I can guarantee you, would never be the same. Every aspect of life would be subservient to climate change policy. It would be unlimited government, and it would control any and all aspects of how we live. Fossil fuels, gone. Will wind and solar be enough? Or are we going to freeze to death in the dark? Lights come from a power plant probably burning coal, maybe nuclear. Forget your car. Green New Deal, ride the bus. Cars are too polluting. Air travel just makes a terrible mess. It's too polluting. Get rid of those airplanes. Well, how are you going to get around? Electric trains. All over this country, electric trains are going to be going wherever you want to go. So we retrofit the whole country with electric trains. Cars are too polluting. So where does that end? The Green New Deal. It doesn't end. Is this economic and cultural advancement, or are we going backwards? This isn't progressive, folks. This is regressive. Okay, here we go for climate change. I believe in climate change. It was 70 degrees yesterday, and I wore a short sleeve shirt. Today I had to wear my jacket. Goodness gracious, the climate changed. And whatever the climate does, my friends, we can't stop it. The political left will always have a necessary apocalypse. The sky is falling. Panic! Somebody do something! In the 1970s, there was to be a coming ice age. Newsweek magazine had an igloo on its cover. Rachel Carson wrote a book predicting one day we would wake up to utter devastation. No birds were singing. No animal life. No human life. Only a silent stream. Climate change was called global warming, but that couldn't stick because too many cold facts got in the way. There's a Walter Williams article on that. It's real good. As soon as we radically change our lifestyle, bankrupt ourselves, our country, send money to some climate organization, what likely is going to happen is the climate will change from being too warm to being too cold. Then what are we going to do? Now here's something to remember, folks. Write this down, etch it in your mind. Climate prophecies are always computer projections. The seas are going to rise in 2050, our cities are going to be inundated, or we're all going to be dead. 2050? It's a computer projection. What do we say about computers? Garbage in, garbage out. Elizabeth Warren has come up with health care for all. That's another one. This is number 3. It was to cost some trillions of dollars, and even some of her strongest supporters just recoiled over that. I think her popularity went down for a period of time. Maybe it's back up again, but everybody realized, oh no, Elizabeth, don't do that. That's just outrageous. And you realize too, private insurance would go away. Healthcare for all is socialized medicine for every human being in the country. Which means that half of our working population who have insurance with their employer would lose it. I bet many of you, including myself, had insurance with the employer. And we like the insurance. People are happy with it. They know what they've got. They know what it costs. They're satisfied. With Elizabeth Warren, healthcare for all, socialized medicine, private insurance is gone. And the private insurance would be gone in only a government decree. That's all it takes. All right, here's another one. The Electoral College. There's an article about the Electoral College. I urge you to get it if you want it. If you're closed-minded, never mind, but it's good for your education. A whole lot of leftists just hated that President Trump won a landslide of the Electoral College. The current crop of Democrats will try and try hard to dispense with the Electoral College. You can guarantee it. And some of them have said so. Elizabeth Warren, well, I'm picking on her. Elizabeth Warren has said flatly she wants to be the last president elected by the Electoral College for her first term, and for her second term she will be elected by the popular vote only. She has said that. How can she do it? It's going to take an enormous constitutional change. But when people are despots and they think they have plenty of power, they'll try to do anything. We cannot doubt that. Now, most of the elections are so decisive that it doesn't seem like the Electoral College was a factor. Why has that gotten to be a factor recently? Well, because the elections are tight. They're closer. But in every election in this country, do you understand? the Electoral College was a factor. It elected the president. Every president has been elected by the Electoral College. College is a strange name, but that's what it is. We'll live with it. Without the college, the president would be elected by voters, get this, on the East Coast, the West Coast, and Chicago. With enough population, East Coast, West Coast, add in metropolitan Chicago, they will elect the president. Boston, New York, Washington, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Seattle, Tacoma, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, and then metropolitan Chicago. The rest of the country would be irrelevant. We would be flyover country. Have you heard some liberals call it that? We're a flyover country. We go from the West Coast to the East Coast, that's all they care about. The rest in the middle don't count. Why would we bother to vote? We're about through. Are you hanging with me?
Yes.
Really, that's about it. It's the basics that have made our country strong. Free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional values, and a strong national defense is why we are #1 in the world. For most countries around the world, these concepts are foreign. And abandoning these principles will indeed destroy our beloved United States of America. And we don't want to take that kind of a chance, I hope. Okay, here's the last word. When our founder, Ben Franklin, emerged from the meeting when the kind of government was decided upon, he was asked, what kind of government will the United States have? He replied, a republic, if you can keep it. Will we keep it? Or will we be the generation that loses it? Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess I'm ready for questions, such as they are. I thought that would take longer, but it didn't.
Who wants it first?
Well, John doesn't have any questions. He agrees with every word I said.
Absolutely. So you obviously don't like the educated elite in Washington or elsewhere. So would you replace them with the ill-educated mass as an alternative?
Well, it's not that people are educated. Education is good. It's just what a person is educated in. If they're educated in anti-God and communism or socialism, if they don't like the United States of America, if they are ready to undermine it, if they are a bunch of radicals and ne'er-do-wells and agitators, they're the ones who are influencing the rest of the ones who are listening to them.
So should we curtail the freedom of the radicals to speak out and agitate then?
No. It's to make us aware of where the threats and these ideas are coming from. It is to make us aware of what is happening in the country. We still have freedom of speech. If they want to propose these radical ideas, they are still free to do it. But we need to know what they're saying. We need to be able to confront them. We need to be able to push back if anybody is doing that. The president listen, the president is pushing back. He is a good example of pushing back on some of this radical leftism. Does that answer the question enough? I'm all for education, but
Okay. So, what about institutions such as the Small Business Administration that promotes business actually? Would you, is it a federal agency, would you shut that down?
Small Business Administration, I don't know. It's another government agency. Every one of these agencies, you understand, has got a multi-million, if not $1 billion budget. And do they do some good? Of course they do some good. Can they be done without? We did without them for centuries until government came along and created new agencies. It is just another one of the bureaucracies. I won't say what I would do with it, but it's another bureaucracy. Every one of those, if you go to Washington and you look, every one of these agencies has a magnificent building. I mean, it is beautiful. It's a work of art by the famous architects of our land. And hundreds and hundreds of people working for every last agency. That is not limited government.
What about the R&D and development work that's funded by the federal government? Would you shut that down too?
R&D?
Yes. Research and development, yes.
Well, it depends on what it is. No, you don't do research and development. We did a whole lot of things. We did the interstate highway system with a Republican, Eisenhower.
That was the government. I mean, you carte blanche said the government is too big. We should curtail this, and so for example, that the interstate highway was a huge boost to commerce, and so the government is not all bad then.
No. Nobody said the government was all bad, but we just need to beware of excessive government, unlimited government that controls our lives, and it probably will suppress the economy. It usually does. Let somebody else ask. Okay, Lorraine.
We only just met, Ray. I don't know what there's a little bit of sarcasm in there.
You've never heard her talk before.
That might not crap. It's not bad. It's fun. It's fun. Ray, you are not happy with the educational system as you see it today in this country, especially affecting the youth and maybe indoctrinating them and so on and so forth. But what I'm curious about is that you basically started your presentation saying that if we just follow these 5 little principles from the Heritage Foundation, all will be well in America. I consider that to be indoctrination. Why am I misreading that somehow? Because you have a lot of faith in the Heritage Foundation, but which obviously is a very bright organization, and yet all these leftists are putrefying our youth's minds. So I'd be interested in why so much faith in that versus, because you received your education in this country, correct?
Oh yeah, such as it was. I still remember a long time ago, a friend, I said, talking to somebody about raising his kids, and he was raising them in a church, Bible, and all that. Somebody said, you're indoctrinating your kids. Folks, that's what it's all about. We teach the children our own values.
Amen.
That's always the way it's been. What values do you want to teach them? That they can be rebel rousers, that they can drink their way into happiness, they can do drugs. How do you teach the children? You teach the children your own personal values. Hopefully they could be American values. It's what we teach them. And that's the idea.
I'm a parent and I've raised my children with values as well. But at some point they become adults. What I did raise them with is obviously respecting right and wrong. But at some point and I don't know if this was your view as a parent, you raise them where they become independent adults, and then you, hopefully, the values will stick, but they will modify them as well, because it's not your generation anymore.
Well, the challenge, of course, is the inculcation of the values that whenever they get into high school, and especially some college, that those values will stick. But you can raise your kids with the best of your own personal values and morality and decency, and then you'll have a college professor that comes along and pulls the rug out from you and from the child and teaches him some radical ideology that you are repelled by. And so that's what I'm talking about as far as higher education and the kind of teaching.
But you may be repelled, but not necessarily the student listening to the professor, correct?
Well, the student may welcome it, but he's pliable. He's ready to learn. And this college professor's got 2 or 3 PhDs, and then he must be right. And they go with it. And they are still learning. They still are growing. They're 19 and 20 years old. There's a lot to learn.
But would you not agree that education and youth changes every generation? And if we stuck with the values that were in play in the 18th and the 17th century, heaven knows where women would be in particular today. I mean, that's what evolution is about, not only of thought, but what we have around us. You know, that education, you know, led to the Industrial Revolution. That changed a lot of lives.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, so on and so forth.
Okay.
Was
No,
that
but
a
there's
question?
always the
Yes,
Good
involved.
question. Must be.
Okay, so another question. Does that help?
My question is, where, I'm trying to discern where your freedom to express yourself begins and ends, because you said on the one hand that the bakers, you agreed with the Supreme Court that they could express themselves in the course of their work by not honoring, not selling to LGBT couples. But then on the other hand, Colin Kaepernick, you said is not able to express his views in the course of his work by taking a knee to bring up the issue of police brutality against blacks. So where exactly in the course of your work, where does the freedoms begin and end?
Well, this is apples and oranges, David. Kaepernick learned some of his ideas from a Berkeley professor, which illustrates exactly what I've been saying. Berkeley cannot be much more radical. It is probably the most liberal leftist college in this whole country, University of California at Berkeley. And that's where Colin Kaepernick learned it. And then when he took the knee and did all that, he disrespected the anthem and our flag. He made a show of it. He made a big deal of it, and he lost his job. And he was one of the ones I was talking about who made millions of dollars. And he lost it. No other owner of a football team is going to touch Colin Kaepernick. He is a hot potato.
So you're saying that the freedom to express yourself ends when? When does somebody's freedom of expression end in the course of their work? When they take on the flag?
All right, okay, maybe I understand your question, maybe I do. Colin Kaepernick could do exactly what he wants to do because he still has the freedom. If he does not want to respect the anthem, he does not want to respect the flag, and he wants to go down on his knees, he wants to make a mockery of it, he can do it. The owner of that team said this is going to be ruinous. I don't know if you play it and noticed the NFL like to have had a cap over that. They realized this is going to ruin the NFL. If these players do this in these games, the fans are not going to come. The owner of that team fired Kaepernick. The owner of the team had freedom to fire him. And that's what he did, because he saw the dollars gurgling down the drain, that nobody is going to care about football. The NFL said nobody's going to care about football. Kaepernick had to go, and his ilk. I hope that helps.
Well, so if I understand right, you're saying that freedom ends when the group disagrees, the group decides.
Let me talk. I got an answer for that. There's no freedom taken away from Colin Kaepernick. He can do what he wants. The government doesn't make a law against him. Nobody sued him. He can do what he wants. The bakery had the government come down on him. From militant LGBT that only chose him because he wouldn't do it.
Another question?
Yeah.
No.
What the heck?
I don't know if it's a question or not, but freedom of speech has levels. It's like, you know, if you run a team, you have the right to run your team the way you want. If somebody on that team decides they want to run your team a different way, they're not in the position of running the team. If they want to do something else, they can quit your team and start their own.
Exactly.
There we go. You brought up Berkeley in the discussion, and I want to know what your opinion is. Is it true that Berkeley has gone so progressive that the school which championed free speech in the 60s now is shutting down free speech in our time? Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think that is happening. That's happening not only at Berkeley.
And I have one other thing I would like to ask if you've run into is I've, especially a couple of Marines I know, have made it very plain. They said that they are willing to put their life on the line to defend anybody's free speech, that everyone in this country should have the right to free speech. Whether we disagree with them, that is actually the most critical point, where they should have free speech. Do you agree?
Agreed. Yeah, fine.
Free speech has moral standards as well. That's why we have laws against libel and slander. Free speech is not unlimited. Free speech has to follow a moral code. And our moral code in this country is a lot different from a lot of other parts of the world. And this country is a lot more successful than a lot of other parts of the world. And I think our higher, more Christian values, which includes allowing everyone else to have their freedom of religion, is imperative. Slander and libel are limitations of freedom of speech, because that should be limited.
Is that a question?
Do you agree with that?
Okay, I'll give it to you. That's just fine. Let's have questions now. The things you'd like to have clarified or something. Somebody has, okay.
But they're free.
Could you explain the difference between traditional values, mores, which are morals, okay? Morals really don't have anything to do with what's in the scripture. They're just mores, okay? And what Jesus Christ declared as, the truth claims that Jesus Christ made. So my question is this: Can you explain to me the difference between traditional values and the truth claims that Jesus Christ made?
Well, that might be a little bit over my pay grade. I'm thinking mostly of American values, like I mentioned with the patriotism. That's just always been a strong American value. And then the traditional marriage, and that's an American value itself. And I would think that is what Jesus had supported a man and a woman, and for that matter, that's where we've got the idea.
I
That's
have a
what.
question though, where did Jesus talk about legal marriage, where one would get a marriage license with permission from the state to marry? I'm not clear about that, so why would Jesus be concerned about a legal marriage? I don't see anything in the scripture about that.
Well, you may have overlooked it.
I consider myself a student of.
Well, I think we are satisfied with Adam and Eve. And they didn't have any kind of approval from any kind of government, and they did not have a document that said they were married.
So they didn't have a traditional marriage.
That was the first traditional marriage.
The state?
There was no state.
There was no state, so why do we have to have a traditional state marriage to declare that
It
we're-
doesn't have to be state. I never said state. I'm talking about the very idea, even when people have lived together, it used to be called common law. They didn't have any kind of document either, but they were effectively married because they had lived together for some period of time and maybe even had kids. That is marriage. Maybe you've missed the point.
Maybe.
The point is, marriage is between a man and a woman. That's traditional marriage. That's all that it amounts to. We don't have to go anywhere beyond that. It is not between two men. It is not between two women.
Would you acknowledge common law marriage?
I don't know where that stands right now. It's just one of those things I remember. It used to be called common law. Has anybody heard common law? Anything?
It's legal in Texas.
It's lawful, it's not
Okay.
Legal for a long time.
All right, let's move on.
You are common law married if you're living together in Texas for more than 9 months.
And holding yourselves out as such.
And
Yeah,
holding
you
yourself
were
out.
mentioning like it was a couple.
Suits me.
Ray, would it be fair to say that you believe that Christian values are the superior values in this world?
I would say yes, sure.
Okay.
But you'd have to get more specific. That's a very, very general question. Traditional values, I think.
Well, there are Christian values, there are Jewish values, there are Muslim values. They all pretty much run around the same course, but Christian beliefs would be more superior to other religious beliefs in this world. Would
Yeah.
that be fair?
I'm satisfied with that without getting detailed.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So the next question is whether it be, so anyone, would it also be fair to say, given what you've said about education and Berkeley and what have you, is that anyone that maybe doesn't possess the same Christian values that you believe in, do you consider them to lack moral fiber accordingly?
It's not my call.
Morality?
It isn't my call.
Well, I'm asking you what your opinion of that
And it
is.
isn't my call.
So you'll find both people who don't believe in God?
Everybody I know a lot of folks, and they have a very wide range of beliefs and unbeliefs. Yeah, we're all friends.
Yeah. But anyone that doesn't believe in a God of any sort,
I feel sorry for them.
well, but do you believe that they have just as much worth and just as much value?
Absolutely.
And just as much right to express themselves?
Of course.
As others would?
That's American freedom of speech. Okay.
John?
Would you agree that people that wrap themselves in the flag are really should be accorded with the epithet that super patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel?
I have heard that expression, but that probably has a different reference point than I'm remembering. So all I have said was that a traditional American value is patriotism. Most of the time, there's not anybody that would disagree with that. We want to be patriots. I quoted about the George M. Cohan's grand old flag. It's been in American DNA. We're not wrapping ourselves in the flag to escape anything. We love our flag. We recognize our country. We thank God we have this country where we have the land of the free and the home of the brave for as long as it lasts. And so we are glad to salute or sing its anthem.
Well, I had a retired professor who made the comment. He said,
Oh, we need a question, John.
listen, I'm going to develop this into a
All right,
question.
make it short.
Okay. The retired professor made the comment. He said, "My country, right or wrong? Nay. If my country be wrong, let me do what I can to set it aright." Do you agree with that?
That's a good one. That's very good. We'll be ready for your talk.
Just
Your,
one more time. What is the difference between a traditional value and what you were saying that the United States had Christian values? What's the difference? Because I don't really see the traditional values line up with what Jesus Christ was talking about. He would never have said, give the state authority over your marriage.
marriage has not always had any kind of a document. Or if it was, it wasn't very much. Again, what we have said is that when two people have come together, a man and a woman, as a matter of fact, to be very clear, and they have children, that is a marriage, and it is a traditional marriage. What I had wanted to show to you and explain to you is that traditional marriage is between a man and a woman. That's the only thing I'm saying. It is not between two men, it is not between two women. Period. I'm sorry, that's all that I can go with that one. Thank you for the question, though. That's all right. But that was all I'm trying to say.
Okay.
All right, Albert. A question.
Isn't the subject of religion completely covered by our founding fathers' statement, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal? There's no statement of religion in there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. We are created equal with the same inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the equality. None of us in here are equal. You are a lot better looking than I am, and you're a lot smarter than I am, and you're a lot older than I am. So we're not equal, but we have equality in this country with the laws and rights and our pursuit of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That is the equality. All right.
You get to sit down, Rick.
All right. I'll be glad to sit down. I'm tired of standing.
Now it's your turn to talk, so who wants to be first? You got 5 minutes.
All right. There's a few concepts that need to be understood here. Government or marriage predates government. If you start with Adam and Eve or whoever, marriages and families existed before governments, and those things always exist before a government gets created. Government is created to protect the people that it governs and to enforce their values. Government doesn't have values of its own. It is implemented to enforce the values of the people that it represents. Okay, and you know, we talk about socialism. Well, socialism, communism, fascism, anything like that you talk about is government. It's government control. It's centralized control. And what we seem to forget is that government is people. You know, so if you have a neighbor that you disagree with, and he gets in control of the government, he can make you do whatever he wants, because he's the government. He has the right to implement force to make you do things against your will because he's the government, okay? But he is an individual and he's no better than you are. Okay, now we have this problem with government socialized medicine in Britain, and we've had a number of high-profile cases where the parents of the child that are in the hospital want to take that child and treat it somewhere else. But the people in control of the government say, no, 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 you can't do that. We're going to do with your baby what we want because we are the government. Same thing with vaccines. If you don't want to vaccinate your kid, the government says, well, we're smarter than you are and we're going to make you vaccinate your kid against your will, even though you do everything you can to stop it because we are the government and we're going to force you to do it our way. That is government. Government is force. Okay, there are some things that government can do that only government can do. Like if you want to do like the interstate highway system. I mean, there was no state or individual or company that was capable of doing that. That is a government function. Government has to regulate interstate commerce and international commerce. Those are things that only government can do. Government is implemented to do those things and to implement the traditional values of the people it governs. It is not implemented to override those values. We need to understand that. Government's purpose is not to take its values and shove them down your throat against your will. And that's what government has become. So whenever you talk about socialism, communism, fascism, whatever kind of government you want to talk about, it's always force over the people that live in the society. Government came after the society to implement what those people believe and to protect them. When government ceases to protect those people and tries to implement the ideas of the people in control of the government against the wishes of the people that it's supposed to protect, it has ceased to accomplish its purpose.
Wow, very good.
Yes, there is this terrible thing called government that exists, this evil thing. I think people have this mystical notion that there is this evil power called government. I think there is, and I think it's the fact that corporate America has gained control of government. And so I think that this is the power that we are subjected to. In fact, all the things that we see, like Big Brother, a lot of it comes from corporations, actually. The tools are quite alarming. And so the notion that there is these elite, actually, liberal elite controlling things, I think is a total nonsense. You know, we all know that government, that America is controlled by big money. I mean, basically, it's bought government. Now, the liberal elite are not known to be super wealthy. They might be endowed with wisdom and learning, but they're certainly not endowed with huge amount of fortune to spend. We see, for example, Blomberg is an example where he's going to buy the election if he can by spending, untold billions. It's amazing that such a person could do that, but that's America. So I would suggest to you that the social economic indicators of this country, which have been getting worse over the last 30 or 40 years, are not because the liberal elite has gained control. I think the reverse. I think the fascist tendency has been caused by corporate America gaining control. And in fact, you can see that they've been selling the country out, actually. And in turn, the politicians have been helping in lockstep with them to sell the country out. Now that's the problem that I see. I don't see, and the fact that really, yes, obviously, what I would say about freedom in this country, yes, if you have the money, you can probably buy your freedom. But if you don't have money, you're so constrained, you can forget freedom. There's no freedom of action. You talk about healthcare, my goodness. I mean, there was a poor lady that went to the doctor for a sore throat. She came away, I think, owing something like $35,000 of tests. Now, you know, such situations. Now, you know, the fact that a doctor has to argue with the insurance company to get a test done, all right, as my wife was subjected to, is totally absurd. Totally absurd, would never happen in England. Now, this is what goes on when you have big money and big insurance companies wedded to the idea of maximizing profit, and they don't give a damn about the people. They just don't. Now you talk about freedom and moral values. No. I mean, I look at socioeconomics, and I would say, yes, it's the American people that count, but do they really have a say in what goes on? No, they don't. They just don't. They don't count. You talk about the electoral college and all this Mickey Mouse. I mean, the whole election system is a total farce. We all know that. The big money, you know, they of both parties. They fund the person that's most likely to look after their interests. It's either Wall Street on the one hand or corporate America on the other hand. Now, the things that people really want in this world, like security of employment, of housing, education, and so on, they just don't. And most people, what's gone on is people who are living a much more precarious existence. And I think I see it, actually. I see it. And you know, the notion that there's some magical freedom and all the rest of it is to be had by the Constitution, I think, is another great American myth. If you got the money, you'll have freedom. If you don't, goodbye. Careful, careful, Robert.
Big trap back here. I can't think of any other country that ever has had a document designed so clearly to protect the individual rights as our Constitution. So I totally disagree with that statement. The Constitution stands between mob rule of total democracy, which is an emotionally driven danger, and corporations.
Corporatocracy.
Corporatocracy, that's right. And we have to have something in between that. We can't let it go either way, because emotions rule in the socialistic mind and money rules in the corporate mind. Like I've said many times, I think the greatest opioid, if you would, in human consciousness is that combination between greed and lust for power. Because you get in positions of power, you can certainly fulfill your greed. I was just listening to a man who had been describing his research recently on the, I forget what it was called, there was an organization set up by Obama to redesign the educational system in the United States, and they were given like $350 million. Well, when Obama retired, a subsidiary of that company that is a publishing society paid him $68 million for the rights for his book. Now, come on. Let's talk about quid pro quo here. I can't think of any group of people on this earth who are more proficient at quid pro quo than our wonderful Democratic Party. You mentioned China. China is far more worse than most people realize. There was a Chinaman who began to see something strange. They were having like 400 to 600 organ transplants per year up until the year 2000, when they soared to over 10,000 a year. And he started studying this. He took 10 years studying it, and then he left China in order to publish his results because he knew they'd kill him immediately. They have and suppressing religion, they have captured a whole group of people who are of a religion called Falun Gong. And when they want to sell an organ, they take one of these people and cut their organ out. They don't even sedate them. They tie them down and let them scream and bleed to death. These Chinese people are the most brutal leaders on earth.
Amen.
They're horrible. I don't think we should do anything to help that government at all. They get up to $100,000 per organ sale. Yuri Bezmenov, I've mentioned him before, defected from the KGB when they were trying to convert India to communism. And he came to the United States, and there used to be, I hope it's still there, an interview of him and also where he's lecturing. And he made the statement that the very first step in converting a country to communism is to tear down the moral fiber, our traditional values. That's what we need to protect, because if we don't have that, we can go to communism. And that if a people have a firm belief in God, you can never convert them to communism. He made those two statements. I think it is very important for us to study history, and not just the new textbooks, but find older textbooks and study history. There were leaders in this world who understood what our founding fathers were trying to do. During our Civil War, the Tsar of Russia put his fleet out in the Atlantic Ocean and told France and England, you will not try to get your colonies back or you will be at war with Russia. And Otto Bismarck, who is the man who took all these warring tribes in what is now Germany and brought them together through treaties and stopped all the warring and created Germany, made the comment to the effect that the experiment being carried out in the United States today may hold the hope of freedom for all mankind in the future. I can't think of a system that gives more possibility of freedom and free enterprise, which has been taken over by
Corporation.
money, basically.
Yeah, right.
Capitalism. I hate that term, capitalism, because that's the focus is on the money. When my dad formed his little business, the whole idea, hey, here's an idea with a new product that is going to benefit people. The money will take care of itself if you can benefit people. You can provide things that humanity needs rather than just go out for greed. And one perfect example, there's a little company selling their little, what do you call these little robotic gyrocopter things?
Drones.
Drones, yeah. They're selling a new drone. The guys who started it used to work for a drone company that marked their prices way above what it cost them to make the thing. And they just thought that was not morally correct. So they formed their own company and they sell a whole lot better unit for cheaper. Well, now that's the idea to me,
Amen.
is to compete and to provide something useful to mankind. When you turn all of your power over to government, which is the definition of socialism,
Fascism.
that's what it turns into immediately. Because the only people who go to the top of a government are greed and lust for power. That's why we, on every level, need to control the government. And that's why the government needs to be as small as possible so that we can control it on a local level.
Amen.
The New England town hall meetings used to control things when everything was smaller and we didn't have this massive inundation of world population today. Because with the growth of population, the growth of spiritual consciousness has not gone accordingly. So we've got just a huge problem, much bigger than it was before.
Watch your step getting in there.
Yeah. Did something come out here, John, or that's?
No, it's just, there's cords all over
Yeah.
the place.
Is it
Watch your step.
We don't need it now. So
Yeah, we don't need that light.
we don't need it, so just like, what, don't trip up.
Okay.
Oh, really?
So, first off, Ray, I want
Calvin,
to start off by
Calvin,
saying that I
sir.
respect you know, your views and your rights of faith and what have you in Christianity. I also was, you know, raised in a Christian faith as well. I considered indoctrination as I look back, obviously, on my life. And I also raised my children in a faith. They also make their own independent decisions, and they made them well before they ever got to college. And they weren't made by any influence upon myself. They were introduced to what religion was because society, unfortunately, does, you know, kind of demand you belong to this group or that group or what have you. And hopefully when you reach adulthood, you say, screw this, I'm independent, I'm an individual, and that's how I'm going to take on the world, okay? And as it relates to the Heritage Foundation, I consider that to be one of the most egregious organizations in this country. They have deliberately loaded up the Supreme Court with their choices for who will decide this country's future going forth, okay? And they have a very definite agenda. So if you're really committed to the Constitution playing out as it was written, I don't see these folks living up to that. Just like I don't see members of our government even living up to the oaths that they took under that very same Constitution. Okay, as it relates to a federal education system versus why can't we do whatever we want to do in Texas? Well, first off, in Texas, State Board of Education, I've been involved with this, I wrote a letter to the editor, okay? They wanted to go, because our textbooks that we write here happen to influence education nationally. They tend to base a lot of the textbooks on that accordingly. So many of them octogenarians in Austin, decided that we really didn't need to pay a lot of attention to our Hispanic history. The fact that Texas actually belonged to Mexico from the get-go. And secondly, we didn't have anything such as slavery. Okay, they were unpaid interns. And while they were picking cotton out there, that was their chance to do their social networking, okay? These are the thoughts that come at a local level because it's whatever drives that local level's culture is going to influence what they want their kids to think. Just like their kids who grew up amongst bigots became bigots themselves. Nothing very Christian about any of that, okay? And as it relates to a federal education, my two children, I put them through the public school system here in Dallas. So they did neighborhood, they went to Franklin, they went to Hillcrest High, okay? And I did that, I could have sent them to private schools, okay? I did that because I wanted them to, I don't need any highlighting, honey.
For this.
Yeah, I know. But I did that because I wanted them to be in a diverse community, not an anti-special community, okay? Educationally, not only in Texas, these are federally mandated situations. They, in elementary school, learn their own Texas history, or whatever the state history is, and they also get another dose of it when they go into middle and high school. They also are taught U.S. history and the Constitution, and are introduced to many landmark cases, okay? So and then of course when they go into college, they just, you know, they go into constitutional law or what have you, they're going to be exposed to very major Supreme Court cases. All right, so I don't know where you're getting your information from, but all children are taught that in our school systems, whether it be in this state or anywhere else, okay? And that's how it should be, because you can't have, this is a big country, 50 states, what have you. You can't have people randomly going from state to state with a different basis from an educational foundation. So national education, I think, is very critical, so that you can go from one state to another. In fact, I don't think it's tight enough, okay? So, as it relates to free enterprise, there is nothing free about free enterprise, because we pay for that in a very big way. The companies that are making all the money off of it, it's absolutely free to them all the way home, okay? Because they don't even pay income tax most of the time. As it relates to the government regulations, this government now is attempting to roll back even more regulations, whether it be EPA or building standards or what have you, okay? And they're even opened up to, we'll let the companies, you know, regulate themselves. They're, after all, such good, honest citizens, right? And so how did that work out for Boeing exactly? Okay, you've got to have structure to make a society be well-oiled and well-run, okay? And moral values aren't in a Bible, okay? They are what a child is exposed to, and how we choose to believe that you have the right to walk around and breathe and love as anybody else does. If we all start with that foundation, there shouldn't be a problem. And oh, by the way, people speaking languages that are coming into this country, many of our founding immigrants never spoke the English language, right up through the 20th century. Okay, many coming in today. Okay, so I don't understand all of a sudden why that's a problem for people. Okay, because no one said just because you come to America you must speak English. Is it your duty if you're going to stay here, you know, to do that? Absolutely. I'm not even into dual or bilingual voting ballots. If you're here, you've taken citizenship, you should be speaking English. But that doesn't make them any less a person than I. So we're finished, John. Okay. I could say so much more.
And you can come up for a second installment.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't know.
Yes, you can. Okay. So let everybody else get their chance first.
Well, Ray, as usual, you know, you and I don't agree on too much. I found some of your statements interesting. I think individual freedom is perhaps overplayed because of the way things are right now. Individually, we learned during the Depression that individuals were limited. And when we had a particular agrarian economy where people live on the farm and they own the land, they could eat and survive. But that's gone now. And all you have is corporation farming now. And where I grew up, people don't even grow a garden. They eat inside the store as much as I do. So that's one of the things. And one thing, when the Declaration of Independence space our values has something to do with what we believe. But it's not law, it's the Constitution, it's just the basic law. And the Constitution said, we the people. And Lincoln said that was government by the people, for the people, and of the people. And right now, like someone has indicated, it's government by the rich, for the rich, and for the rich. And that leaves most of us out. And we aren't such a rich nation if only 10% of us earn $100,000 or more per year. We got to pay $250,000 to buy a house. So we're not that rich. A large number of people are living really struggling right now. So a lot of those assumptions by the heritage stranger I have taken great deal of issues with. The declaration was actually a declaration of war, but it started off saying this is what we believe. That was all men created equal then? No. And we still have issues in that area. But in spite of that, I think America is the best country based on what I know, and I've been to a number of countries. I'd rather be here than be anywhere else. But I think we could be much more better if we weren't so greedy. So that's what I think the real problem is. I won't say anything about education, but I think what you said all the government does in education is try to bring about innovation. No Child Left Behind was basically a system of testing everybody in the country. And that's the best thing, because they really didn't fund it. So when President Obama came with something else, and people have issues with that too. But the 10th Amendment does say that, you know, what is not prohibited by the federal government can be done by the people of the state. So with that, the states has never had the resources to do what they need to do. Not willing. Texas is not willing to do it. And they spend the resources on, right now we've got a problem with highways because we don't have enough money from the energy tax to maintain them. So we had a couple of constitutional amendments, and that's what you see all this work going on right now, is from that money, not from the federal government, because they haven't passed no infrastructure money in a long time. The thing on religion, we have a separation of church and state, and I think that's a good principle. The government is responsible for secular things, not religious things. The church is supposed to deal with religious stuff. And each person makes their own decision, and I think that's good. You go to church or not go to church. To sin or not sin. So there's some things that I think that there's limitations, but if it wasn't for the federal government, we would have a lot of more problems we have right now, because the average state doesn't have the money to do that, and they're not willing to tax. You know, a lot of states have income tax. We don't have one in Texas. We have a pretty high sales tax, and that's more unfair than the federal income tax, but it's income tax based on your income. So I think what we need is a better balance. And I don't see that happening. And when you talk about patriotism, when we have a president that avoided the war, and he started this thing about Crelia, he was the one that said it, and they went along with it. He was talking about the injustice of the police department to Momar. That's what he was rebelling at. He wasn't that concerned about it. But when a person avoids the draft because he's fluent, and they talk about all this patriotism, I don't listen to them because they're lying. Do something that you live by what you actually have done, and he hasn't done it. So I thought that was a bad thing, and I was really surprised that he did, but you know, the guy has enough money, he don't have to worry about it. Not playing the rules, he doesn't have to worry about it. But those are the kind of things I think about. This, you know, basic culture and the things you put a great deal of emphasis on in our morality. I think we are getting a little worse in that area, but the media is controlled by money too, because it's just that the media, they're doing what the people that's buying those ads tell them to do. Just like I did what the people told me to do what I work for. I got to make a living, so I do it as long as it's legal. If it's illegal, I won't do it. I wouldn't do it. So those are the kind of things that individuals, we can make some decisions, but we can't make a lot of decisions because there's many things much beyond our reach. And the government is supposed to do more than regulate interstate commerce and fight wars, because they've been making big mistakes in the last 2 wars we're in right now, making it another one. And so the people need to have some concern about this, because it's not the rich people's children that go and get shot up. It's the working class. The majority of people who volunteer, so the all volunteer army now, are people, so that's the best way for them to make a living. That's why they're there. It's not patriotism. And if our leaders don't manifest patriotism and just preaching, we don't listen to them. So those are some concerns I have, is that a lot of the things you're talking about, you're ideological in a different phrase than I am, and I'm not a radical liberal, I'm a moderate. Halifax influenced me a great deal. If I'm driving down the 3-line highway, I'm gonna be in the middle. But I got better mobility, I can move right and left. So I don't go too extreme one way or the other. And I think that's really, we need a better equilibrium. And that's what we need to be fighting for.
Michael Brown with the Irwin Rommel School of Law. made a statement in a lecture he gave. He said, the only rights that you have are the rights that you can defend in a court of law. Now, that ought to scare all of us if you have any idea how screwed up the courts are. The joke is, the man says, I want to go to court and get justice, and of course, that's someone who hasn't been there yet. So, with Operation Paperclip, after World War II, the actual number of Nazis who were brought over has been increasing as we've gotten more information over the years. But where were these Nazis placed? They weren't placed with the fascist right. They were placed in liberal academia. They were placed in the universities and in the research facilities. And I know because I had several neighbors who could barely speak English. And you know, the children on the block, we didn't really key in on what was going on, but that was at a university. So then, going back to one of the other subjects brought up, it wasn't Nicholas II. I don't think it was Nicholas I. I think it was the Tsar before then. If you want peace in the Middle East, this is how the Tsar did it. He said to the Ottoman Empire folks, he said, if you harm a hair on the head of a single Christian, I will come in and I will obliterate you. Now what happened immediately, almost after Tsar Nicholas II was, and his family were assassinated, we had the Armenian genocide of 1.5 million. So that is an example of leadership. Of course, we have a leader who said he was going inside the Beltway to drain the swamp. Unfortunately, the swamp is bipartisan. And in fact, I think his pump got broken. Because you start looking at all the different things going on, the only thing you can really pull out of the whole scene there is that things are kind of stuck in the mud. So, you know, we can all be unhappy about something there. The interesting thing, going back to the universities, is that, you know, they say communism is dead, the Soviet Union fell apart. Russia's turned back Christian Orthodox. Now they're having some form of capitalism there. I think it's basically oligarch capitalism, but you know, it's not quite what they had under the centralized planning. So where is communism today? It's alive and well in the American universities. Amen. That is where it's promulgated, that's where it's preached. Mm-hmm. And one of the things about college, university, especially getting advanced degrees, is so much stuff is thrown at you so quick. You just accept it. You don't have a chance to really filter it on the way through. And so we have a real situation of a great divide in this country, which is only increasing. It's of Grand Canyon proportions today. Because the left has been progressive. Well, what does that mean? Well, they've been moving the Overton window to the point where they're calling the right the fascists. Now, if you go back historically, I searched really hard to try to find fascists who were actually conservatives. They were all socialists. Good old Adolf was a socialist, National Socialist Party. I mean, before he went to war and did the shameful things he did, he actually had used social programs and improved the economy there in Germany quite a bit. I'm not saying socialism can't work. Before Muammar Gaddafi was destroyed so shamefully on media, when Gaddafi was had actually stepped down from power there in Libya, the country had a great economy. So even an economy can flourish under a benevolent dictator, which towards the end of his days he was kind of moving that way. So, you know, we have a real challenge here, whether you're on the left or you're on the right. We need to roll up our sleeves. We've got a lot of work to do. We need to hold government at every level accountable. Mostly the only level where you can have any effect is locally. Go for it.
Don't worry, I'm still awake. God bless the internet. I'm going off the title of your talk here, Threats That Seriously Challenge Our Nation's Foundations. These things were touched on a little bit, but to me the main thing is censorship. The threat of censorship and the destruction of free speech concerns me. In 3 minutes or 5 minutes, I can't go into all the things. That combined with the modern advances in surveillance, technology, and just media, all the technology is going to change the game. So why is this important? I see us falling into this left-right thing here. Lorraine wanted to get you. Gotcha. I got you. Because she identifies with the left. And you're identified with the right.
I'm a Democrat.
That's good.
Why is that left all of a sudden? I'm a Democrat.
I don't even know what you are. I know that you were dogging them, and I know you're. So liberal and left, Calvin, are not the same anymore. The left has decided to go extreme. Liberal is a very respectable ideal for me. Liberal means you're open to learn and progress. That's good. So I'm going back to my original theme, censorship. If how am I going to put this?
Go ahead.
I forgot my thread. I must be getting,
Say whatever you think. Say whatever you want.
The more you talk, the less I can think. Okay, so the left now is not liberal, and they want to take over the liberals, and the Democrats are right now are faced with a real corrupt thing where the liberal ideals that really made the left a great thing are being taken over by the more flashy left stuff, and it's a danger. Now, it wouldn't be so bad if the media wasn't so obviously corrupt. That's why I say God bless the internet, only half jokingly. If they censor this internet, there won't be another voice, and we will get lost. If we don't have a better, more refined understanding of the truth, we have an intricate society, we're going to get lost. He's looking at his watch. I've been up here 2 minutes. You're up there 10 minutes. Come on. I'm not even 2 minutes yet. Give me a break. Yeah, I'm very touchy. I'm delicate. I've been up all day. Come on. So here's the thing. We don't want censorship, and we want to be able to hear all sides. I see the left and the right, and the left more obviously with the media complicity as a new religion. As a new
Just step back just a little bit.
is that me?
Yeah.
I thought it was left.
No reverberation.
Okay.
Okay. I see the left and the right as religions replacing the old religions, and there's things that modern life tells you that the old religion just does not fulfill. I can acknowledge that. We need a left and a right. However, we need the truth to be our guide in all cases. And when it becomes your religion, in a way, you're being given a dogma by Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. It's not a real good religion. So anyway, it filled a vacuum, and oppose censorship. Sorry.
One more and wrap it up. Two more. Two more?
I'll just say something real quick about the foundations, the topic of the subject, the subject of the topic. One of the things that
Can't hear you. Can you talk louder?
okay,
Yeah, speak louder.
one of the things that I feel compelled to say is just look at our foundations more deeply and acknowledge that they have been changing and that there are reasons for them to be changing. For instance, you brought up the Electoral College. It was relatively recently that I just found out through the article in the Atlantic that the Electoral College basically came into being because the southern states wanted equality as far as overall population with the northern states. And the reason they felt they wouldn't get it is if they just did it on landowners by themselves, they wouldn't have the population. So they wanted the population to include the black slaves. So that's where the Electoral College was a balancing act between population versus landowners. So they came up with the Electoral College to give the southern states the equal say in the government. As far as religious equality or religious roots of the nation, everybody says we're founded on religious freedoms, but in reality, it started off as like Pennsylvania had their own different, I don't remember which one it was, Quakers or each state, and some parts of, I think mainly states at that time, were one religion. And if you crossed the boundaries of that religion, you could be excommunicated and kicked out the door, and that was a big thing because you had to go to another state and find new housing, and it wasn't. So our foundations are not as free as some people believe, and that was basically just we need to be aware of what our foundations were, deal with them honestly, and with all of the other feedback here, we need to decide as a group where we want our government to take us and stop letting the bullies be the ones that have control, the bullies with the money or the bullies in whatever fashion we've allowed to do the leading.
All right, I'll 5 minutes. You're very good. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm kind of a newcomer to this group, so,
Rich will be speaking.
but I'll be speaking on the 25th. And I'm someone that I don't have a television, I don't follow politics, but I'm a student of the scriptures and of the Constitution. And so what I'd like to just interject here is that I appreciate everybody. Everybody has some really great insight, and you know, all the people that stood up here have some really great things to say. But some of the things that I would like to preface that I'm going to be speaking about on the 25th is that the Constitution is something that the U.S. citizen is not party to, if you understand the 14th Amendment. Does that make sense?
No, you can
Yeah,
explain it to them.
it's kind of
Okay, well, I will explain it on the 25th, okay? So all this left and right, there are good points in both, but it doesn't apply to the U.S. citizen, because the United States became a corporation through the 1871 Act. You can look it up if you want to tonight. The Enforcement Act of 1871, which created the United States, Inc. And a lot of people here are worried about the United States as a corporation. The United States is a corporation, and the U.S. person, which is the U.S. citizen, is a corporation. Now, we know that already, right? We know that but we don't really understand how that fits together. So the U.S. person has no rights. They only have benefits and privileges. Does that make sense? We've traded our rights for benefits and privileges and obligations. So our benefits are Social Security, our obligations are to support the war, and the 14th Amendment says that we cannot object to the national debt. Now, I won't have time to get into the national debt and how that was created in 1914 through the Federal Reserve Act, or the 1933 Trading with the Enemies Act that made all U.S. citizens enemies of the state. So when we object to the national debt, we are enemies of the state. Now, so it doesn't matter if we're right or left. So I just would like to throw that out respectfully, because I understand the dilemma that the concerns that everyone has. That I know John and a lot of people here, we had a Regina, if you know Regina in Virginia, do you know her? Anyway, we had a little group a few years ago, Activists for Truth, and we were so concerned that the Muslims were going to come and get us. And we were good Republicans, and we were trying to support Ron Paul. And I was even a delegate. I believed in the fiction of the president. There is no president. There are no elections. He's appointed through the Electoral College. I can explain that. That's a big topic, but there is no president. There is no country, because the country became a corporation in 1871, and there is no freedom. There is no republic. Now, the only reason why there isn't a republic is because we have contracted to be a U.S. citizen, and we do not have the privileges and immunities of the republic. We only have obligations. So that's pretty much dissolves the left and the right argument. But it does make a lot of sense, and I'll have a lot of information on the 25th about this. I'll have about 150 pages if you want it, with court cases and what's happened through legislation since 1871. Anyway, that's it.
I guess I'm the last one standing. I want a little comment on the Electoral College. You brought that up. The Electoral College was set up, if you examine it, it was the original president was elected by the Congress, not by the people. And then when they expanded it to the Electoral College, each senator and each representative were the votes for the president. So the popular vote, when they put that in effect, then the popular vote for the congressman for each congressional district is an electoral vote, and the electoral vote is also for the Senate. But now we have a problem, and that big problem is that the states all go one way or the other. They take winner, take all. So if Texas votes Republican, every electoral vote in Texas goes Republican. And this is how the thing gets all screwed up. Now, one of the good things about Electoral College is that the basis of it is that if there's a challenge to the election, or if somebody has to redo that election, you only have to go back to the one congressional district or the one state where the problem is. You don't have to redo the whole thing. Or if you have a popular vote, you're gonna have to do redo the whole thing, and it'll be a real mess. So, to me, the solution in the electoral college is to get away from winner takes all on the state. That it should not go that way. It should be nationwide electoral college. However, the popular vote is how the electoral college goes in each district. It'll be very close to the popular vote, and that would solve the problem. The same with the states. So that to me is a problem that's not a problem. Now, you brought up a lot of things here, and I've only got 5 minutes. He was talking about Federation, in the Federation 62, Alexander Hamilton justified the Constitution's choice of the Senate to be the jury for an impeachment trial of a body able to preserve, unawed, and uninfluenced the necessary impartiality between the individual accused and the representative of the people as accuser. Our Senate, how can the Senate conduct a fair trial when the principal leader of the Senate, in our case, Mitch McConnell, has prejudged the case, stating publicly that the president will be not removed from office as a result of a Senate trial? That's already been stated. Senator Lindsey Graham, South Carolina, he famously said that he is refusing to even read the testimony of witnesses of the House impeachment inquiry. Both leaders of the Senate have shown their bias and prejudgment of the facts. They have set in motion a sham trial they're making, which will purposely not reveal pertinent facts and will not recognize what the House has developed, notwithstanding the remarks of Mitch McConnell that the House has produced a, quote, shoddy product. All of this is improperly designed to direct influence to the jury pool of senators who have elected these Senate leaders. It should be obvious at the very least that Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham should be charged and recused from the Senate trial, in my view, as they have repeatedly done their part to introduce pure partiality in the Senate trial and prejudge its outcome, which does not square with the original intent of an impartial Senate trial. Notwithstanding Mitch McConnell's public position that this is a political dispute which further impacts the jury, when in fact it is not, and further disqualification of both men in not comporting their oaths of office by virtue of their public statements to the contrary. Well, anyway, what I'm trying to say is that living up to the Constitution is what we have to do. I agree with you on that, and that is part of it. Anyway, I better shut up while I'm ahead, and you get the last word.
All right.
I really don't need these glasses. I only use them to see. There was a comment or two or three that I left out of the talk, mostly inadvertently, but then there have been at least two of you who mentioned the Electoral College, so maybe just a little bit of a loose ends would be helpful. I mentioned about the Electoral College is helpful because if we did not have that and we had a strict popular vote, the East Coast, West Coast, and Chicago, with all those masses of humanity and those gigantic cities, multi-millions, would elect the president, and the rest of us would be simply disenfranchised. That is true. And this last election with Trump proved that very, very clearly. And so the Electoral College is necessary. The whole idea is to protect the rights of the minority.
Amen.
With a popular vote, we will have its own form of mob rule. And we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to restrict the power of the majority. And another example is with the House of Representatives, it is it's majority all the way. Then you have the Senate, it is the minority all the way. And a lot of people are aggravated that Wyoming and New York each have 2 senators. That's the idea.
Amen.
Restrict the power of the majority. Otherwise it would be mob rule. All right, final remark, I guess. Our country's always had threats against it. There have been tyrants and dictators around the world who would love to see us taken down. I still remember in the 1950s, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev said, "We will bury you." And at that time, we worried that he might could do it. I've only heard that. I read that in a book.
He banged his shoe on the table at the same time.
But
He banged his shoe at the same time.
and he banged his shoe on the table. Famously, took his shoe off and banged it on the table. "We will bury you." And a lot of us who were around at that time, we thought, "Good grief, Soviet Union is mighty and powerful and unpredictable. That could be a disaster." Well, today, the threats we have are a lot more from within. I don't think that there's any country that's daring to try to take us down. But when we have horrible, radical, socialist, communist ideas floating around and a population that's so deluded they're open to these ideas, you run a significant risk that our country could be destroyed from within. These ideas I've told you about, Green New Deal and open borders and eliminating the electoral college, those will be destructive. I mean, if our basic formula for success is upended, it's anybody's guess what our country will become. Now here is a profound quote pardon, by Ronald Reagan. If you don't like him, please listen anyway, all right? Here it is. "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they, in their lifetime, must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free." Ronald Reagan. Thank you.
Well, that's it for today. They take us out here at 10:30, just so you know. Our speaker's still here if you want to talk to him. He's got other things to do, I think. But anyway, see you all next week, hopefully.
Yeah.